Hello, we have come from the Department of Archaeology, History, Cultural Studies and Religion at the University of Bergen, and we are having a little chat today about religious minorities on the occasion of us recently launching a new fully online master's program on religious minorities, which is EVU, further education based. As you all know much better than we, the Utdanningsdirektoratet has in several Lehrpläne introduced the problem of or the relationships between majorities and minorities as an important aspect. So that is why we think that talking about this theme today is of interest for Lærernes Dag. My name is Michael Stausberg, and I am joined by
Alexander Vanderhaven.
We are both professors in the study of religions, and we have both been working on religious minorities for quite a number of years, I'd say. My own field of expertise in this matter is an ancient Iranian religion of pre-Islamic origin, the Zoroastrians or Parsis in India, and in the course of in the context of this program, I will also be teaching a course on the Yazidis. And Alex, tell us a little about your research on religious minorities matters.
So I've been occupying myself a lot with Jews, which have been throughout history, most of their history, been a religious minority dreaming of a majority. And maybe let me just show you something. So in one of the most interesting episodes of Jewish history is in the 17th century, when about half of the Jews in the world, and we don't know exactly numbers, but that's the estimate, fell for a Turkish messiah called Shabtai Tzvi. And they were having dreams of becoming majority rather than a minority, ruling rather than being ruled. And there was a little bit of a hitch in the program, so he was to take over power from the Sultan, etc., but he was arrested. And he was given the choice, you want to die or you want to convert to Islam. And he chose the non-traditional way, and he converted to Islam. Most people then, for them it was enough by then. But a number of Jews in the Greek city of Thessaloniki, they followed him because they came up with all kinds of reasons that if you convert to Islam, you actually go into the realm of evil. Complicated story. This group of people from Salonika, they still exist, and now they live in Turkey, and they're called the Dunmus. So they were living in Saloniki for hundreds of years. They were practicing a kind of secret, they had secret Jewish rituals, they were praying to the specific Messiah. And then in the early 20th century, there was this population exchange, forced population exchange, and because they were officially Muslims, they ended up in Turkey. Mm-hmm. And so I've been talking a lot to Dunmus, and what is interesting that you hear a lot of stories about tragedies, like we're being persecuted by the Turkish government. Most of our knowledge has been lost. It remained in Saloniki, so we're being like pressured from the outside, basically into extinction. If you talk a little bit further, and this is what I would like to show you now, there's another much worse enemy, and that are modern values of freedom and individualism. So let me show you. This is a part of a documentary made by a friend of mine who is still editing the last. So this is a premiere.
Şimdi biz hem moderniz hem çok geriyiz.
Çok geriyiz.
Yani
çok
iki şey arasında.
Yaşam tarzı çok modern ama evlilikler çok yobaz.
Zihniyet de yok.
Evet, zihniyet de yobaz.
Era el último recuerdo de tu cariño que yo tenía.
Yani herkes birbirine bağımlı, kadınlar şey oluyor ve ben dedim kendi kafama göre yani okuyacağım, okumam gerekiyor, meslek sahibi olacağım yani ve bu işi yırttım o zaman yani. Yırttım.
Siz yırtmışsınız. Bir tek o.
Bir tek ben yırttım.
Peki bu akıl hastalıkları bu kadar iç içe evlenmeyle ilgili mi sizce?
Bence. Bırak akıl hastalığı, psikolojik problemler de. Çünkü baskı o kadar müthiş olmuş ki o baskı insanların kendi gelişmelerini engellemiş.
So,
Right,
what do you
yes.
think? What is the greatest enemy of the Dunme community?
Yeah, interesting clip. I think, I mean, they address several problems, what they call bigotry or narrow-mindedness, kind of an introspective
Absolutely.
perspective. And it became also clear that they are endogamous. So they don't marry out, which in a way also limits the adoption of new perspectives, and it's and they seem to have some tensions, or a lot of tensions
Absolutely.
Among each other. How many Dunmes are there in Turkey right now?
It depends when this is being broadcasted. It's every day one less. And
Yeah,
you see
exactly.
one of the enemies. So traditionally religious communities like these, they disappeared because they were forcefully converted or they were massacres. But now you have a much more subtle enemy, which is the possibility of individual freedom, a dislike of arranged marriages, so people want to marry who they want to choose. Modern Western values also of your own personal destiny,
Right.
and these groups and they're still there. All such groups, they were endogamous. They were very much. Even though they were always part of the outside world, they were, in order to survive, they stuck to each other. So you have also
Exactly.
groups who have communities everywhere, but they arrange marriages between different places. And intermarriage was really not a possibility also from the majority's point of view.
Yeah,
And now
exactly,
it's...
and this is also the case among the Zoroastrians and even the Parsis in India. And Indian minorities, and at the same time, when you say the enemy or the threat is kind of a Western or liberal mindset, then my impression is that also minorities were sometimes the first to actually absorb such ideas and to launch them also as a prospect of getting out of their isolation and of connecting, of building bridges to the majority.
Absolutely. If you look at, for instance, the Middle East, but also other places where modernization has taken place, it were often the religious minorities who went along and saw this as a way to acquire more freedom, more security.
Exactly.
So they often very enthusiastically embraced it. But I think also they were not aware of the dangers of modernization, of freedom. So it's an interesting balance of the different strategies that the religious minorities have towards the outside world.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
openness, closing yourself.
Yeah, right. Now, Alex, we've been kind of intuitively calling such a group for a religious minority. Would they themselves use this term for them, about themselves?
Yeah, this happens once you go into the field,
Yeah.
and you start knocking on doors. Hello, religious minority, can I talk to you? And there you see that the word religious minority is often a choice made by the religious minority or by the outsider, which can function well and can function not that well. So, for instance, I was speaking last summer to the Samaritans in Israel, who are a descendant of an ancient community that was once very big, like a major contestant to be the Israelite tradition, but they lost and they were like forcefully converted to Christianity and Islam of history. At some point they almost didn't exist anymore. Until recently they discovered mail order brides and so they started to intermarry again because they also had, like what was described here, mental illnesses, physical illness, because they only married amongst each other. And I noticed that the word religious minority was not liked. And one of the reasons was that these members were politically very active in Israeli society, less and less, but they're still also cooperating with the Palestinians because they're positioned in the West Bank near the Palestinian city of Nablus and in a suburb of basically Tel Aviv. So they did not like the word minority because it comes with a connotation of you're being persecuted and you're fighting for your rights. At other times, and I think here in Norway, it does pay off to be a minority because they're like you are being treated unfairly, and if you're being treated unfairly, you're being helped. Yeah, but in other situations, especially if situations are not democratic, complaining doesn't always help. You rather say, what a wonderful dictatorial regime we have here, because this would help us further our... I think also before we were talking a lot about the subject, you called it the term relational, which I really like. So it really depends from which perspective and what interest you're serving to use the word minority.
Right. So yeah, we come back to that, and it's also a strategic notion, right? I
Absolutely,
think we discussed this quite a lot. That it's not something like on the face of it, it seems that the minority is kind of a numerical thing, right? So you have a smaller number and a bigger one. So the smaller one is a minority, and that seems to give it some kind of a naturalness. However, what happens when you don't have this one big majority? What happens if this, as you said, this quantitative idea also makes you aware that you are very little, and this doesn't always also reflect the actual societal importance of
exactly, because first of all, we usually assume that it's a numerical minority, and we then with it assume that it's also a minority in terms of power, that there are smaller numbers towards a homogeneous majority, and they're less in power. And there's, of course, like once you start entering the field, it becomes always more complicated. That's any academic field, but here specifically. So you realize that, first of all, there's not always like one big majority. There can be all kinds of different groups vying for power. You have sometimes that minorities are in power, such as in Syria, at least according to this hour. Like next hour, it might change again. So they can have a ruling position, or they rule in combination of other minorities. So what, for instance, happened a lot in the colonial period, that the colonizers, they were really good at playing out the different groups against each other. So they also liked minorities to adopt them, and so that they were dependent on the colonial power rather than on the rest.
Yeah, and there minorities could serve a role as intermediaries.
Absolutely.
In the Middle East, not the least, the Christians were especially exposed, as the assumption was that they were kind of culturally closer, so they provided an entry point, and at the same time it was easy to mobilize an audience at home, saying, we need to help, we need to assist our brethren in faith to live a life in dignity and get out of the discrimination that they had been subjected to for centuries. So they entered a whole new kind of dynamics,
which is also a risky dynamic, because one type minority, and this is a good example, is a minority that has a majority somewhere else, and as a result, this minority is often suspected. So, for instance, Christians in the Muslim world, when there were still like powerful Christians in the West, the Byzantine Empire, they were treated with more suspicion because they might be cooperating with the enemy, whereas the Jews did not have a powerful. So it can be very risky to have that majority on the other side.
Yeah, and I think we see this also, for example, in India, if we move a little bit outside of the Middle East, where Christians are a religious minority that is quite visible, at least in certain parts of the country. And there is increasing discrimination against Christians. And part of it also seems to be that Christians are perceived to be or they are identified with the powerful international forces like America, capitalism. They are getting funds from abroad. They are kind of being they get privileges and they have unfair advantages. So all this, or this at least, is claimed. So all this gives also some kind of legitimacy of
persecution,
of keeping them at bay.
And this is, I think, why our students also will get really important tools to understand that if you are helping a minority somewhere, you might not help this minority. You might not help this minority by publicizing their suffering and by publicly supporting them. So we're dealing with very, very sensitive matters of the consequences that you from here shouting injustice might end up in actual people being killed here. And sometimes also helping minorities is being experienced as condescending.
Exactly.
Because I remember that this one of the standard definitions of minority, so not religious minority, but minority, is a United Nations definition from 1977. And there it says that minorities want to become treated as equals as others, rather than being better or being more. So it's almost like you lifting up from below, but not more. So it's you have to be very careful with treating minorities in a condescending manner, also regarding them as pure victims. Because one of the things that I think our program does well is we look at minorities as active agents, as navigating often very complicated situations, and minorities often have survived for thousands of years.
And they of course also have to deal with their own minorities.
Yes.
So we always look at the minority as kind of a homogeneous unity that is in defense against some kind of a bigger majority, but among minorities, as we have seen some glimpses, some rather harmless glimpses or funny glimpses of in this clip, there is lots of infighting, power struggle, and
by protecting religious minorities, you sometimes end up protecting a repressive system.
Yeah,
so
or favoring some
absolutely
some fraction in a minority. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. So one of our starting points in this, or one of our themes in this conversation, was where does this notion of religious minorities come from, or how spread is it? And this, I think, is really an interesting development that I think this after the human rights discourses have become so prominent that now suddenly the map of the world is being redrawn, and you find minorities and religious minorities kind of everywhere. And this has even intensified after the United States in the late 1990s have started to make religious liberty a key agenda in their foreign policy. So they write these
An export product.
Yeah,
Yes.
kind of an
Yes.
export product,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And other countries have joined. And in Norway, for example, is very actively in foreign policy in support of religious minorities, which also, as critics complain, of course means that they are first of all, or conflicts that might be there are first of all seen as religious conflicts.
Yes.
Because you identify the unit of analysis as a religious minority in the first place and not as an economic minority, an ethnic minority, a political minority, or whatever it could be. So there, once again, this label religious is kind of a strategic one and one that is being selected.
This is because this is one of the reasons why in our program, because we are a religious studies department, we strongly focus also on this notion, like what is religion, what is religious, how is it being used, and also how it's being used in cynical or in unconscious ways. So I think it's very important to be careful with. I think we have to give also some basic information about our program, rather than chatting on forever. This is our program, a 19 ECTS degree, which you can do in 1.5 times a year full time. But we expect that most of our students will be taking it, and our present students also, they are part-time, because most people do it when they have full-time jobs, and they do this instead of creating their students' exams. They are students themselves.
Right. Yes.
You want also, so we also, like, so not you, we're talking to you teachers, but we also are attracting people working for NGOs, activists, even people who are just interested in minorities and doing something entirely different. So one of the things also of this program is going to be very international, and there will be people that are coming from very different backgrounds. And I think that's also in itself, the student body will be very much enriched by by its great variety, even religious minorities. Yeah? And our staff are professors at the University of Bergen who have been making courses themselves. They will be teaching them. Classes will be small, so you will have, it's being online, but you will have developed tools to closely interact with each other. So students are making cooperative projects like websites and things. So the people are working together in flexible time, but also very intensive. And of course, the two of us and other people working with us will closely supervise our students. So like we'll have monthly meetings, we're talking to people, prepping them, peppering them up. So it's a part-time program. It's intensive, but at the same time, it's a good balance, I think, between work and intense study.
Definitely. So thank you for your interest, and please visit our website, and all the best for your future. Thank you.